Well, good evening and welcome members, officers and those members of the public here at the meeting and those joining us virtually. We'll crack on with the agenda and the first item is apologies. Kirsty?
Thank you, Chair. So apologies have been received from Councillor Lauren Bright, Councillor Ford, Councillor Hawkin, Councillor Heppel, Councillor Piper, Councillor Shepherd and Councillor Whitaker.
Thank you. Item 2 is public contributions, and we have no public members of the public registered to speak. So we'll move on to item 3, declarations of interest. So those members with interest to declare should refer to the agenda item and describe the nature of their interest when the item is being discussed. Item 4, agreement of agenda items part 1 and 2. We have no part 2 this evening. Move on to item 5. Correspondence put forward by the chair. We've got one item. Gordon on my right finishes. He leaves us this week. Friday is his last day, and I'd just like to say on behalf of everyone at Torridge, it's been a pleasure working with you, Gordon, over this last year or so, and we certainly wish you all the best for your appointment. Thank you. Then moving on then to item 6, the budget 25-26 medium-term financial strategy, pages 4 to 23 on your agenda. And Gordon is going to present this report.
Thank you, Chair. So this item gives us the opportunity to agree the revenue budget for the 25-26 financial year. And it's the revenue budget, of course, which funds the cost of ongoing services. So the presentation tonight and the reports will describe where we were 12 months ago when the budget was set for 24-25. It will describe some updates that have occurred as we close the financial year 23-24 and developments over the course of this financial year. It will describe the funding sources that the council has available to them in setting the revenue budget. It will describe the settlement, i.e. the funding that's reported from central governments to councils. Another key area, of course, is the level of council tax that gets set. And then it will look at the overall revenue budget position for next year and the next 4 years after that. I'll describe some of those key assumptions and some of those sensitivities to those assumptions. We'll also look at the contributions to reserves and we'll look ahead to some of the challenges over the next financial years. Next slide, please. So this time last year, when we set the 24-25 budget, there was still a challenging financial position. So you can see from the graph that every year at the MTFS, there was an assumed deficit. So there was enough funds in the budget stabilisation reserve to just about meet the cost of those deficits over those next 5 years. So at that point, the structural deficit was around 3%. So moving on to the next slide. So since we set the budget, we've closed the financial year 23-24, and you'll be aware that there was an underspend in those years of around 1.3 million as a result of some increases. So the collection fund was greater than anticipated. There were some new central government grants, and also treasury management was much higher than anticipated. So back in October, when the full council met, they allocated that underspend to a variety of schemes, but in particular to project management type costs and to the facilitation of the delivery of the capital programme. You will also know that from the QBR reports that have come through in this financial year, we're anticipating an underspend in this financial year as well. So that means that the assumptions broadly when we set last year, when we set the current year's budget, have broadly been sound. And you'll notice from the graph on temporary accommodation costs that thanks to the investment we put into capacity, the costs are going down and we anticipate them going down further as more people at risk of homelessness are able to be housed in our own accommodation rather than those that are commercially available. Moving on to the next slide. Just to remind you all of what the key sources of funding are to the council. The single largest is fees and charges, and they were set by CNR back in January. but also, of course, two big areas are council tax and business rates. You'll notice that that small slice of pie there relates to central government funding, and that's decreased a great deal over the last few years. Slide 4B reminds you all of how our costs are expressed. So you'll see by far and away the largest area of cost for us is staff pay. You know, the areas related to premises and transport are much lower. Moving on to slide 5. So the settlement again describes the receipt of funds from central government. This is a key part of our funding assumptions. So the new government, it was a manifesto commitment that they would provide a more than a single year settlement, but next year it's for 1 year, but there is still a commitment as from year 2 of the budget, or 26-27 onwards, will get either a 2 or 3 year settlement, which will be very helpful for financial planning perspectives. But it also coincides with a review of funding and also with a reset of business rates. So there are some increased risks to the funds we get from central government over the next few years. Well, some of those headlines from the settlement are that overall total core spending power, which of course assumes the maximum increase in council tax, averages out at 6% in aggregate across all councils in England. However, districts didn't do particularly well. On average, they only receive a 0.3% increase. Also, a number of funding streams were removed and another one was introduced. One of these was the recovery grant, and Torridge did particularly well after this. You will be aware from the reporting on the budget that employers' national insurance rates increased. We're receiving funding to around 40% of that. And also, of course, there's this new extended producer responsibility funding of approaching £1 million, which we get to collect waste. So this is a new funding stream, which does come with certain commitments, but we didn't budget for anything like that. So that's artificially made the numbers look good for the next financial year. So moving on to the next slide, and council tax. So before we can get to setting a council tax, we have to develop a council tax base. And in order to do that, we have to make estimates over the number of new houses being built. And then we look at the national statutory exemptions that are in place, and also the operation of our local council tax support fund. Once that's in place, we're then in a position to confirm the council tax base, and that was achieved at the full council in early December. The recommendation contained within these papers is an increase of 2.99%. And what this table shows you is what that costs the council taxpayers of Torridge, both in terms of the total increase and in terms of that increase per week. Moving on to the next slide as well. This is a reminder for all of you. Some will be very familiar with these figures, but of course, of all the amount of money that Torridge collects in terms of council tax, only a small proportion, now it's less than 8%, is retained by Torridge. So, for example, we'll get to keep around just over £5 million. But Devon County, for example, will be getting over £48 million in council tax from us next year. And later on in the report as well, it also describes to the average what that council tax increase looks like to the average council taxpayer in receipt of the local council tax support fund. So moving on to the budget for the next financial year. You'll notice in the tables and in the description that in every year at the MTFS, we anticipate expenditure being greater than income. Now, there are 3 primary reasons for this, and it also shows an increase in deficit to that was presented 12 months ago. Now, there are 3 key reasons for this. The first of which is that the cost sharing agreement regarding waste collection ends with Devon County Council. It's also the fact that there will be some new capital financing charges coming on stream as a result of the borrowing for the operational centre and for the leisure and services assets. And it's also the fact that with the fair funding review, we're having to make some estimates as to how much reduction in support there will be from central government. If we move on to the next slide. So previously you recall that within the central reserve, we had almost enough to meet resources over the period of the MTFS. Now, of course, it looks like by the end of year 3, we'll have run out, we will have run out of funds. And if you want further detail, towards the end of the report in section 8.1, it also describes on a line-by-line basis the movement between the assumptions in the budget for this time last year and the budget as developed now. So in section 9, we talk about the estimates and the assumptions contained within the budget. Because the key to the robustness of the budget will be how precise and accurate the assumptions are made. So here are some of those key ones. So we're assuming a maximum increase in council tax for every year. We're making some assumptions as to support from central government falling. There's an assumption that staff pay will increase at 3% for the next financial year and 2% thereafter. And also there's some key assumptions as regards temporary accommodation, but also as regards treasury management. So we're assuming that we'll continue to get 4% on cash balances over the course of the next financial year. Even though there will be some reductions as we draw down on the reserves to fund some of the capital spend. So I'm happy to state that I believe the estimate to be robust. So moving on to section 10. It's also important that we apply sensitivities to some of these assumptions. So you'll recall those key assumptions that support the budget around staff pay, treasury management, central government funding. But this next section gives us the opportunity to play around with some of those assumptions a little bit and see what that will mean in practice. So, for example, on the one in front of you on the presentation, this talks about what the impact on the deficit will be if the council decides not to increase council tax this year. So of course there's the impact this year, but in every other year as well, because if you don't increase it in this year, you can't catch up in future years. In terms of reserves, so the next slide looks at reserves. So reserves are put in place in order to set funds aside if there's some doubt as to the timing of cost arising, or also if there are costs that have to be met over a multi-year period. So this table shows the contribution to reserves contained within the revenue budget. These will be familiar to most of you. There's one new line, which is the training reserve, and that's to set aside funds to support additional training for staff with one eye on English devolution to help to upskill and retain staff during this period of transition. But I'm happy to state again that I believe the level of reserves to be adequate. We can just move on to the next section. Yes, so looking forward, there is some challenging financial times ahead. The MTFS does show the full application of the budgetary stabilisation reserve in order to achieve balance. However, you need to bear in mind as well that the council does have a proven record in delivering savings, and that over the next 12 months, officers and a member budget working group will be able to look in more depth at future savings options. And so moving on to slide 12B, this shows the impact of some of those savings options. So for example, for car parking income or for planning income, we budget based upon what we're confident we will achieve. But of course, in reality, those levels could be higher, and some of those can be quite volatile. So it stands to reason that at some point over the next few years, planning income may well increase. Treasury management, for example, may well be higher than we're budgeting, so there will be additional funds available. So even though at the top of that table, it shows what our anticipated take from reserve will be as the budget is set before you. In reality, there's a number of items that are quite volatile, which will make the situation better than anticipated. So the next slide, Chair, just highlights those recommendations. Shall we go to Paul?
Yes, please.
So it states that the Bounty council tax for 25-26 will increase by 2.99% from £189.50 to £195.17. To set the net revenue budget at 12.109 million. To make the contributions to reserve as outlined in 11.4. And in light of the risk to the council's finances identified in the report, the member budget working group should continue its work bring the council's revenue budget back into balance.
Thank you, Gordon. You, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I realise this is a bit 11th hour and it might cause a potential headache for, not for Gordon, but for our new finance manager. I'm actually going to propose that we freeze our council tax for the coming year. I mean, just listening to what we've been talking about, bearing in mind, average wages apparently have gone up around about 5% across the country as a whole. But I don't think that's happened very much in Torridge. Certainly in my ward, a lot of people are on minimum wages and they probably haven't seen any increase, or hardly any. Gordon mentioned that in 23-24, we had an underspend of 1.371 million, which is great. And I think he said we're probably gonna have an underspend in this current financial year. And he's talked a lot about the assumptions behind the budget. And I think that's the key word, because it's educated guesswork, but it is guesswork. We don't know what's coming down the road. We didn't know that interest rates were suddenly going to peak and we're suddenly going to be a lot better off than we thought we were going to be. We never know what's going to come. And of course, the elephant in the room is reorganisation. Torridge probably isn't going to be here in a couple of years' time. There'll be a new council in one form or another, but this council probably won't be here. I believe that we're sitting on something like 15 million in reserves, which is money contributed by the council taxpayers of Torridge. We also mentioned that we've had, next year is going to be the last single year funding from the government. After that, we're going to get multi-year funding. So hopefully things will be a little bit more clear-cut long-term for whatever council's dealing with it. But I think, given all the uncertainty, the fact we've got this money in reserves, the fact a lot of people are suffering, I think we should actually do something for our residents and actually freeze council tax for a year. And when I hear a lot from people saying, taxes are always going up, services are always getting worse. Don't know whether anyone will second me or not.
Thank you for that. Anyone else like to speak? Did you want?
Thank you, Chair. I was actually going to recommend the proposals. I know that if we, and we've done it before, we froze council tax some years ago. We got behind by £2 million and we've never gained that money up. So whilst we've no idea what's coming down the line, we do know that if we do not increase the council tax, the government will assume that we don't need that money and it will probably be deducted from the government grant that comes to us. So we won't be any better off, we'll be worse off by that amount of money. So I'm happy to recommend we do accept the budget as it is. Thank you.
Chair.
I'll say that.
Councillor Brenton?
Thank you, Chair. I'd second Councillor Thomas, not the first time on this council that I've supported a non-increase in council tax. Bear in mind that they said we won't be here in a couple of years' time. And also we've got these reserves, we don't know what's happening in the future, and our local population are in dire straits. We're not talking about massive amounts of money here, but for people who are on the threshold, and I mean, they're the ones that really catch it, aren't they? Not the ones that are on benefits so much, well, obviously they're not well off over on benefits, but you know, it's the people on the borderline that are really going to watch their pennies very carefully. So I would support Councillor Thomas's amendment.
Right, okay, there's no one else. Sorry,
Could I-
Councillor Mrs. Brenton first.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I must say, I do agree with Councillor Thomas and the seconder that really we don't know what's coming down the line. We know of all the uncertainty in America and in Europe, and all of this is not going to do any good for our population. People are bound to be squeezed. Whatever happens, if we do increase the budget for defence in this country, it's going to affect everybody in terms of all the other services that we expect and aren't getting enough of it even at the moment. We've got to concentrate on places like the NHS, where people are severely ill and the service they're getting isn't good enough. So I would say that actually councillor Thomas's compassionate suggestion should be taken up. But my question originally was about second homes. There's no mention here of any income from the second homes that we last year agreed that we were going to, well, it was, what was it, 1.5 or something? I don't know, I can't remember
We
exactly.
doubled it.
Doubled it, that was it, doubled it. That's not in here anywhere. Is there no income coming in from that yet, or is it not recorded? What's happening about the second homes income?
I'll respond on a few of
You
those
certainly
points.
can, yes.
Yeah, so in terms of the council tax freeze, if I can just remind you all that the core spending power that's determined by government works under the assumption that all councils take up the maximum offer of council tax increase. And of course, across all the precepting bodies, the amount of council tax that the district is lower than any other precepting body. So ours is the lowest increase. It's also, of course, still lower than inflation, both in terms of the short, medium and long term. You're still looking at inflation, even in the current climate, of between 3 and 4%. And of course, it comes on the back of inflation being significantly higher than that of recent years. So that in the medium term, our funding, the reason why the deficit keeps increasing is because the funding is going up by much less than our cost base has. So that's a key point. And of course, in terms of the underspend, we have had underspends a number of times over recent years. And the reason behind this is because we've been saved by one-offs for the most part. So even though 1.371 million was a large underspend from last year, 1 million of that related to treasury management. And one of the key points I always say to the council and to other committees in front of them is we mustn't get to the point where we become reliant upon treasury management income, because it can increase and it can decrease very, very quickly at the same time. So we're very mindful of where there are alternative sources of funding to seek to maximise those where we can. And of course, there's the operation of the council tax support scheme, which is the approach that's open to the council to have a targeted scheme of providing assistance to those most in need. So rather than just not raising council tax for everybody, we have the council tax support scheme in operation, which provides up to 75% relief to those, and it's targeted at those most in need. But of course, any sort of freeze of the council tax will affect everybody equally, whether they're in hardship or whether they aren't. So those are the key points there. And of course, in terms of local government reorganisation, well, whatever the structure's got in place, the same obligations continue, the same support to the community exists. So even if it looks as if there's a different council and it's structured in a different way, they'll be facing a similar funding challenge. We're not actually helping anybody by walking away from this funding stream. And of course, if we don't take it up now, we won't be able to take it up in future years. But in terms of the specific question around second home loans, yes, it's not directly mentioned because that decision's already been made. That was made a year ago. But there is around £150,000 worth of additional council tax income related to the 20% second home loans premium.
So can I ask, is it not ever going to be recorded in our budget?
Well, there are lots of issues that aren't specifically referred to, because there's lots of areas like that. But yes, I mean, if it's something that's particularly interesting, then we can go out in future. But it wasn't specifically referred to just because it wasn't a change. That decision had already been made.
I think some people are sufficiently interested in second homes in this area.
Councillor Andrews first.
Can I just say, in the advent of devolution changing the council, is that money, are the reserves protected, or could they actually be taken away into a different area?
It will be a decision of the new council how the
So they could be just taken away?
Yes.
Councillor Tinsley, I believe, was it?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, I really understand where you're coming from, Councillor Thomas. But I really support the proposal to help people in hardship, the poorer members of the community, but we all pay council tax. Taxes, I'm quite surprised that Councillors Brenton want to actually cut taxes, because taxes are there to take from those who could afford it, take from everybody, and to put into services. And the people who benefit most, who need those services most, are those who've got the least money. And if you freeze council tax, you're actually putting money into the pockets of people who can afford it. The people who pay most council tax, who live in big houses, are going to get the biggest benefit. So I wouldn't be able to support it, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Okay, well, it's been proposed, so let's try again.
Yes, sorry, could I just point out, we can't freeze council tax, we can only freeze that small amount that Torridge
Yeah.
are responsible for. The police, Devon County, the fire brigade are all putting up their council tax.
Yeah.
So we're talking about basically on Bandy, £6 a year. That's what you're talking about. You're not talking about the council tax in general. You're talking about that specific amount.
Only our percentage of it, yeah.
We are, only, as Gordon explained, we're no less than 8%. We've been hovering just about 8% for the last 2 or 3 years. We are no below 8% of the council tax. So what you're talking about is disadvantaging Horwich Council, but the other councils, the fire, police, Devon County, will just carry on. And that is a much greater proportion. If we're less than 8, you're talking about whatever the figure is, 92% of the tax will still be going up according to whatever the other groups have done.
Yeah.
On the reserves, our reserves at times are actually budgeted reserves, because what you were talking about, Gordon, is that the reserves we got will fade out in 3 years' time anyway, but it's not 12 million, is it?
It's the budget stabilisation reserve. That will-
It's
that
the
will
budget
pay that.
stabiliser,
Yeah.
which isn't the same as the reserve.
No, it's a small part of it.
It's a very small part of it. So we haven't got 12 million in reserves. We have got 12 million, some of which is earmarked for future projects. So don't think that we're sitting on 12 million. It'd be lovely if we were, but if we were, the government would probably take it off us anyway. It is money that is going for projects. And as Gordon said, just a small percentage of it is the stabilisation fund.
Very briefly, if you would, councillor.
Just for clarity then, what do we actually have in reserves?
In earmark reserves, we have around 14 million. And there's another £1 million in general balances. And within that 14 million, there's the budget stabilisation reserve. And we started this financial year with around 2 million. There's an assumed drawdown within 24-25, and there's an assumed take across the MTNS.
Councillor Dart.
If we did not increase this council tax, which I'm wholly supportive of, but you mentioned that we would dip out on core funding from the government, what in real terms would we miss out on for that? Because I couldn't find it specifically in here. Does the core spending include the recovery grant, the rural sparsity funding, the lower services support grant, services grant, and new homes loans?
Yeah, well, the core spending power is a governmental tool designed to reassure everybody about what the total amount given is on average to English councils. And of course, it works under the assumption that councils increase theirs by the maximum. And as a district, we can't increase ours by as much as others, which is just about 2.99%. But we do not lose any additional funds from central government if we don't increase council tax.
Councillor Leather.
Yeah, only briefly, I wouldn't like the public who are watching tonight or listening to get the wrong impression. There's not £15 million sat in the bank account waiting for somebody to come along and allocate it. Most of that is allocated. The reserve we had is allocated. The other thing is, it was in the paper only yesterday, in the Times I was reading. District council's got 48 billion of debt they're carrying. Now, we're very fortunate at Torridge, and I've been for years, that we are, and I've complained sometimes that we're perhaps a bit too risk averse and not spending what we should be on various things. But our treasury has always been managed very well. We've always been lucky with Steve himself used to do it. And Gordon's been, we've had good management. yeah, not taking risks too much, not calculated risks, but sensible. And we've always been, compared to our neighbouring councils, we've always done very well in managing our finances, which is to the benefit of the public out there and us as, we're all council taxpayers as well. But I wouldn't like anybody listening tonight to think there's 15 million pounds that Tories have got sat there doing nothing. That's not true. And we are very well managed. We've got the budget working group who thoroughly looked into all this. CNR have gone through all this. So it's here for confirmation, because it has to be confirmed by full council. And I would urge everybody to vote in favour of this small, as the leader said. Our share of the council tax is a tiny part.
Thank you. Right, I'm going to take this to the vote now, and it's being proposed by councillor James, and it was seconded by councillor Locke. And as that was the first one that was proposed, sorry, this first one that was seconded, we'll take that vote first. So a show of hands for all those, a recorded vote, sorry, just told me that. It is a recorded vote, so we'll take that first. The recommendation is as outlined in the documents that Gordon has just read out. So, where you go, Kirsten?
Thank you. Councillor Andrews.
I'm for it, the suggestion.
Thank you. Councillor Back.
For,
Councillor Annie Brenton.
Against.
Councillor David Brenton.
Against.
Councillor Bright.
For.
Councillor Bushby.
For.
Councillor Cottle-Hunkin.
For.
Councillor Dart.
Against.
Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Gibson.
For.
Councillor Gubb. For. Councillor Hackett.
for,
Councillor Haynes.
For.
Councillor Harding.
for,
Councillor Hicks.
for,
Councillor Hodgson.
For.
Councillor Inch.
for,
Councillor James.
for,
Councillor Johns.
for,
Councillor Leather.
for,
Councillor Lavelle. Councillor Locke.
For.
Councillor Newton.
for,
Councillor Pennington.
for,
Councillor Smith.
For.
Councillor Thomas.
Against.
Councillor Tinsley. Councillor Wheatley.
For.
Thank you.
24, Chair, 4 and 4 against.
Thank you. That's clearly carried. Thank you very much. Okay, moving swiftly on to item 7, council tax resolution, pages 25 to 20, sorry, from 25 to 26, and it's on pages 24 to 30 in your agenda.
Thank you, Chair. So now that we've agreed the council tax rate for next year, we're in a position to confirm the council tax resolution. So all that this does, it's a relatively technical section which brings together the council tax levels from all of the precepting authorities. So even though in the report it does talk about provisional levels from the county and the police and the fire and the parish, we can now actually confirm those amounts. So they are as stated. So this will in future become the basis of the council tax bills that get sent out. And you'll notice towards the back of that report, you'll see the appendices which detail on a parish by parish basis what the council tax level to be for all council tax payers. Thank you, Chair.
Any questions, Ken? Do you want-
No, I'm just happy to propose.
Okay.
the capital,
Yeah.
sorry, the tax resolution.
Thank you. Okay, it's been proposed, sorry. Sorry, I think it's just, councillor Newton had already seconded that, so. Okay, it's been proposed and seconded, so recorded vote again, so can we please, take it to the vote, Kirsty?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Andrews. Councillor Back.
for,
Councillor Annie Brenton.
Abstain.
Councillor David Brenton.
Abstain.
Councillor Bright.
For.
Councillor Bushby.
For.
Councillor Cottle-Hunkin. Councillor Dart. Councillor Elliott.
For.
Councillor Gibson.
For.
Councillor Gubb. Councillor Hackett.
for,
Councillor Haynes, sorry.
for,
Councillor Harding.
for,
Councillor Hicks.
for,
Councillor Hodgson.
For.
Councillor Inch.
for,
Councillor James.
for,
Councillor Johns.
for,
Councillor Leather.
for,
Councillor Lavelle. Councillor Locke.
For.
Councillor Newton,
For.
councillor Pennington,
For.
councillor Smith,
For.
councillor Thomas,
Abstain.
councillor Tinsley, councillor Wheatley.
For. 25, 4 and 3 abstentions, Chair.
Thank you, Tom. Motion is clearly carried. Okay, Gordon. Okay, moving on to item 8, the capital programme for 25-26 to 29-30, pages 31 to 38 on your agenda. This is to receive the report of the Deputy Section 151 Officer. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So I'm going to give a report on the update of the capital programme for 25-26. So the capital programme covers the next 5 years and consists of approved projects.
Sorry, Peter, can you just tilt the mic so you speak a little bit later and come a bit closer?
So the programme covers the next 5 years and consists of approved projects we refer to as PIDs. These projects are funded by one or more of the following, which is reserves, contributions from revenue, capital receipts, and or grants. So at the bottom of that slide, we've got the capital programme, which was approved a year ago, in February 2024. This had £47 million worth of approved projects with identified funding of 50 million, which gave us a surplus of just over 3 million. Next slide, please. So to update the programme for next year, we've got 4 new PIDs to be considered for inclusion into the capital programme. So we've got sound level meters, which is noise monitoring equipment. We've got audio visual equipment for CAD-STAN, where we are now. We've got the replacement electric van for the boroughs. So this is just the cost in addition to the sort of normal vehicle we've got already in the programme. And lastly there, we've got parking ticket machines, cost of 142 grand. So these are funded from, we already have a car park programme. So these will be funded out of that, but there's no additional cost to the programme for those. Next slide, please. So along with the additional PIDs for the year, there's also movements in the year. So in the last 12 months, the programme's been updated to extend it for an extra year to out to 29-30 for the full 5 years. We've included the 23-24 surplus that was allocated to capital on a few specific projects. We've got the change in the operational service centre, which was changed to Discot Road, and council have also added a few new projects in the year, such as the town hall roof, leisure works, the Holsworthy pool decarbonisation, and the local housing fund round 3, as well as the Appledore Green Centre slipway. So when we pull all that together, that has increased the programme marginally to just under 48 million, with 50 million of identified funding, which gives us a surplus of 2.5 million. Next slide, please. So that 2.5 million has to be considered in the context of the vehicle programme. So we have a vehicle programme where we put money into a reserve every year to save up for a major fleet refresh. What that means in practice is that we're saving money all the time. So actually that 2.5 million of surplus we have, actually 2 million of it is actually saving up for the next large fleet refresh in 32-33, which means the rest of the programme, which is amounts to about 43 million, has a much smaller surplus of only 450,000. Next slide, please. So here is just a slide to show you the pressures that the capital programme is under. So of that 43 million, there's 456,000 left, but actually that's got to absorb various different pressures over the next 5 years, which are the leisure centres, which have various amounts of capital maintenance expenditure required. We've got the transition to net zero. We've got all new PIDs, which may be identified in future years. We also have the linear defence, which we're working with the Environment Agency at, which we're not sure what costs might be incurred from Torridge for that, and any future inflation. So all that in context, so I've just come to the recommendations. So we're recommended that members consider the recommendations of Community and Resources on the 27th of January and internal overview and scrutiny on the 4th of February. And that's the full council that the capital programme is updated to include the 4 new projects, which is the sound level meters, the audiovisual equipment, the replacement electric van for the boroughs and the parking ticket machines. There was also an additional recommendation made by internal overview and scrutiny on the 4th of February, which was where operationally viable, that the parking ticket machines should be updated using solar power technology where appropriate.
Thank you, Peter. Was that? Councillor Hames?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, can you clarify a bit further the internal scrutiny recommendation? How does that operate? Does that, we'll be voting for that tonight, will we, or does that have to go? That normally go back to CNR, doesn't it, a recommendation? So how does this actually work? And what are the financial implications if we do purchase solar powered machines? Will it be an extra amount or what? Can you just clarify those things?
I can talk a little bit about the machines. Speaking with the parking manager, he's actually said the machines they're looking at all sort of come with small solar panels attached. So it's more about looking at the locations for what works where, more than that. So that's the detail. So the additional cost for that is reasonably marginal, I think at this point.
So sorry, does that sort of come within the recommendations now? We'll be voting for that, will we?
I think it certainly says that.
I believe so, yes.
Councillor Brenton?
Thank you, Jim. The audio-visual equipment for this building, which part of the building is it intended for?
I presume it's in this room.
For this room?
Yeah.
Interesting, as I asked a question at the beginning of last year, was told that this room needed no updating in terms of its audio, at least on the sound side. So can you tell me exactly what's that? Give us a ballpark idea of what that will encompass?
You know
I don't know that offhand, I'm afraid.
Tom, would you like to just clarify that?
I don't have the detail in front of me, but I do know it will improve sound equipment on the ceiling, better technology to make the room better to be able to rent it out to others. And then Councillor Pennington raised it 18 months ago, looking for recommendations of how to improve this room.
I think my understanding, Tom, is it avoids this contraption in the centre and then trailing wires everywhere. It'll be a built-in system rather than something that's put out by the caretaker every night or every meeting and then taken away, etc.
Interesting though that when I did ask that question at the beginning of last year, I was absolutely categorically told, and I've got the copy of it, at this full council meeting, that there was no need for any more improvement. But there we are.
Well, perhaps he took your comments on board then.
Can I just ask one question about the parking meters? There has been considerable controversy recently about the difficulty people have with the latest variation of AI and solar panel assisted parking meters in terms of people being able to input their registration number or whatever mechanism is required to register that you're parking. So can I ask for some reassurance that whatever parking meters we get, they will be user friendly for the people of Torridge and not just some kind of high polluting thing that will look good and have a solar panel, but actually will be an absolute imposition on people who are trying to park in Torridge. Because as I'm sure you all know, there's had to be a regulation brought in to stop people being fined thousands of pounds because they couldn't do it in the time required. So I do think that is an issue that should be taken into account in any new type of parking meters and any new type of technology, that it actually thinks about the people who are going to use that equipment and not just have it imposed without any thought for people's actual ability to access it.
I'm sure all those things have been taken into consideration, but Sean, would you like to clarify that?
Yes, Chair, I can provide councillor Brenton with that assurance. The parking services team done quite a lot of research into the best machines. They're proposing a tried and tested machine. It's modern, but not cutting edge, if you like, in terms of its technology, and is well regarded elsewhere where it's used. So yes, I can provide that assurance.
Thank you.
I'll be the first.
We shall see.
Oh, yes.
Councillor Lavelle,
I believe, or I was given to understand that also these machines would take cash.
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Which I was very gratified to hear, based on the solar panel
Yeah.
appropriateness. Councillor Haynes has just said to me, and I can't see the recommendation from internal scrutiny, which everybody agreed with and put forward. Is that included in, if we accept this? That's.
Yes,
although
it
it's
is.
not written, although it's not written down, I think it's because it's not written down.
Yeah.
It feels like, is it really?
Yeah.
Page 38.
Yeah. I mean, if this motion, if this report gets proposed and seconded, yes, it'll be included, right? Someone else have a hand up?
Oh, good.
Sorry, beg your pardon, didn't do my homework. Beg your pardon, didn't do my homework.
Chair, just for people's interest, seeing we are discussing it, the ONS next week will be initiating a review of the PID process, having been 4 years since it last did it. And in that review, there'll be a task and finish group, and they will be looking at including a climate score rather than just a climate statement in PIDs, and also a social value score. Just to put you mind at rest that there's evolution on the way. And I would propose.
It hasn't been yet.
I would propose that.
Thank you. All right, it's been, sorry, councillor Haynes, did you want to speak on that?
Second that.
All right, that's already been seconded. So councillor Newton proposed that councillor James has seconded it. Can we, is this a show of hands this time? Yes, it is, yes. Show of hands, all in support, please.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Moving then on to item 9, Treasury Management Report and Capital Strategy, pages 39 to 65. And again, that's all for you.
Thank you, Chair. So every year, the full council has to approve the Treasury Management Strategy for the following year. So we have a detailed report, quite a few appendices attached in your packs. These set out the Treasury Management Strategy for 25-26. There's also the counterparty list of who are allowed to put money with. Also prudential indicators, our MRP, which is minimum revenue policy, and finally our capital strategy. Next slide, please. So key highlights from all these is that actually we've had no new borrowing in the year. Interest rates have actually reduced in the year, and we still expect them to soften further in 25-26. Also, we have the prudential indicators, which are there to help the council manage its debt and its borrowing. We set various limits for borrowing, which is the sort of net borrowing, authorised limit, and operational boundaries. We also show in these indicators the financing costs as a percentage of net revenue. But for Torridge, it's a little bit strange because we have elevated deposits at the moment. So actually this gives us a negative rate and sort of a negative financing costs because it's net income. And then finally, there's a liability benchmark, and this kind of compares our current future borrowing versus our investments or reserves. So after all that, I'll come to the recommendations, and that's that the council approves the Treasury Management Investment Strategy and counterparty list, along with the prudential indicators and minimum revenue provision policy, as well as the capital strategy.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes.
Thank you. Yeah, the investment list here, deposits. The Lloyds Bank one that's still an ethical one, is it? That right?
It is, yes.
Just point out again, our sort of total reliance on Goldman Sachs Bank, which I gather is one of the banks, one of the several banks which have withdrawn from a climate commitment. Which a number of sort of companies, etc., are doing in the light of certain developments in the United States. So I constantly remain surprised we have so much money in just one bank, really.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Hodgson,
Propose recommendations to this report.
thank you. Like to second it? Yeah. Okay, it's been proposed and seconded. I'm sure that's all in support, please.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to item 10, the updated contract procedure rules and procurement thresholds, pages 66 to 68 on your agenda. Gordon is going to present this report.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So as a consequence of the Procurement Act of 2023, there's been an obligation for a major rewrite of contracts and procedure rules. And you'll see that those have been forwarded to you as a link. So there's some additional requirements in terms of publishing information across all stages of the procurement cycle. And so this just reflects the new obligation on public bodies when they procure goods and services in future. And there's much greater emphasis on transparency, openness and fairness, so that the information is available to be seen by a lot more small and medium-sized enterprises. So this just reflects the fact that there will be new obligations on staff where they do undertake major procurements. Also, as a consequence of this new legislation and to bring our thresholds in line with other district councils, we're suggesting an increase in thresholds at a point at which we are obliged to sort of formally tender. So thank you, Chair. Those are the recommendations from the report.
Thank you. Councillor James?
Happy to support the recommendations.
Councillor Locke just beat you to that. Okay, so it's been, sorry, Councillor Brenton?
Is there a sort of number for the threshold? I mean, what is the increase in the threshold?
They're shown within the contracts and procurement regulations.
It's in here somewhere, is it?
Yes.
So you can't just give me the figure.
Not off the top of my head. I mean, one of the key thresholds is now really.
I didn't notice it. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll peruse it.
Thank you. Okay, it's been proposed and seconded. All in favour, please show.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 11, appointment of non-elected representatives, pages 69 to 70. And again, Gordon's going to present this.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So we've sought for many years to obtain an independent member for audit and governance. There's been previous recruitments in the past that have never been successful. But we're pleased to say that after a thorough recruitment process and an application form and an interview with myself and with the Chair of Audit and Governance, we are now able to recommend an appointment. His name is Mr. Poppy, and he's previously been a very senior member. He's got a professional property qualification. He was a director at local authorities in his career, and he's now also an independent member of another audit and governance committee in Essex.
Thank you.
Having been involved in the interview process, I would like to move the recommendation that we appoint.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Brenton. All in favour, please show.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item 12, appointment of, I should say Chief Finance Officer, I believe, but yes, pages 71 to 73. And the Chief Executive, and I believe the leader may, just the Chief Executive, possibly the leader as well.
Chair, thank you. So I guess in unusual fashion, as you've just heard a number of presentations from the Council Section 151 Officer and Deputy Section 151 Officer, I now bring in a report, a reappointment. So, as the chair pointed out earlier, Gordon leaves the council this week. And so we've been through a recruitment process to appoint a new section 151 officer. That interview panel was the chair of council, Councillor Bushby, the leader of council, Councillor James, Stacey and myself, which took place recently. And consequently, we've appointed, subject to full council approval, Peter Hudson to the role of the council's finance manager and section 151 officer. And for the deputy 151 position, Gwydion Batten. Chair, so the recommendations are for the council to approve those.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, as a member of the selection committee, I'm happy to support the recommendation. I think Peter knows his stuff, and I'm happy to support that. And together with the other department in it, we're stepping up to the deputy 151. So I'm happy to support the recommendation. So thank you.
Okay, it's been proposed by Councillor James, seconded by Councillor Smith, that both appointments be ratified by this council, and I look forward to working with Peter. Yeah, I'll get there a second. I'm sure we've all heard Peter speaking. I'm sure it'll be a first class appointment. So all those in support, please show.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, we'll just give the senior members of the council a minute to leave the room. It is a requirement when we're discussing this particular item that members of senior management have to withdraw. So, item 13, pay policy requirements of the Localism Act, pages 74 to 80. Introduction. Yeah, I'm happy to present this. This is our yearly requirement to show the requirement under the Localism Act of the proportion of pay within the structure of the council. The figures have gone up slightly, but the percentages have stayed the same. We're probably in the lower half within the county of the pay scales, but the figures are good, and I'm happy to recommend it. And Sarah is here to answer any questions. She's got the answers more than I have. So, back to you, Chair. Thank you. Okay, so Newton has seconded it. No questions. All in favour, please show.
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, item 14 is to ask questions submitted under procedure rule A9. There are no questions. Item 15, there are no petitions. We have no part 2 items. So, declare the meeting closed.